Hearing his mother's question, Grid said disappointedly, "I would have had much more energy if I had eel for breakfast." Hearing his son's request, the father slyly said, "Why would a boy without a girlfriend eat eel?" As soon as Grid heard his father's caustic question, he immediately replied with a grudging answer, "What's the problem? I could easily find a girlfriend if I wanted to." Hearing this, his mother replied, "Our children are already hiding something from us." Immediately after that, Grid suddenly brought up a topic that he had rarely mentioned at family gatherings before, and he suddenly asked how his grandfather was doing. Upon receiving such a question from their son, the parents were stunned and stared at Grid, who noticed this strange behavior and asked what the reaction was. When the father came to his senses, he answered his son, "Nothing. It's just that it's quite unusual. We don't talk about him. We'll visit him next time." And Grid nodded and said yes. Continuing to eat his breakfast in a great mood, Grid mentally said it would be a great time to see him. Meanwhile, the day after Rebbit went to Khan's forge, he returned and told the Baron what he had done, and when he heard what he had done, he exclaimed in displeasure that you just said. Taking a bite of the apple, the Baron of the land exclaimed angrily and threw the apple at his subject, "Why did you do something so reckless?" Ignoring the food that was thrown at him, Rebbit heard angry shouts in his direction. "If Khan cannot pay the debt, the forge will be used as a deposit. Why are you giving him a chance?" Trying to contain his anger, the irritated Baron exclaimed, "You made a deal with Khan like this." Wiping his face after being hit with an apple, Rebbit spoke to his master. "Things are already going badly enough. People don't trust Miro's company, for the company will be better off making friends with the people of Winston." Hearing these words from his subject, the angry Baron exclaimed that you dare to teach me. This land belongs to me. I am the master here and you are an idiot. Hearing the insults that flew in his direction, Rebbit tried not to take it seriously and mentally said that this is the limit of Valmont's capabilities. If this continues, the company will be destroyed. Immediately after these thoughts, Rebbit confidently told his master that the people respect Khan, and if we defeat him fairly, will agree to trust us. Trying to convince Baron Valmont of his rightness and sincere intentions, Rebbit said we must give the impression that we are giving him and his skills another chance so that we can improve the company's image. Hearing such words from his subject, Baron Valmont finally calmed down and said with a sly smile, "And that way we would get regular customers would be nice." A little pleased with the excellent result of this competition, the Baron asked his subject what about our opponent, could he somehow win? Recalling Grid, whom he had judged by his appearance, Rebbit said confidently, according to the information he had received, he was an ordinary young man without a reputation, and we already had a man who would win this competition. Hearing that they had everything ready for victory, Baron Valmont confidently exclaimed, "We will destroy them perfectly." Hearing the joyful voice of his master, Rebbit thoughtfully said in his head, "Even against a man with no name, we will send the best, but we must not relax." At the same time, somewhere in Mr. Khan's forge, one of the visitors who came to see him said in surprise that this boy had really defeated Bale's gang. Looking at Grid practicing his blacksmithing skills, his grandfather added that he looked like an unremarkable Sala. Hearing such words from his friend, Khan confidently said, "Don't underestimate him. He's an amazing guy." Hearing the two old men talking, Grid exclaimed in annoyance, "You can be quiet there." After Grid's request, the two old men fell silent, and suddenly an astonished crowd burst into the forge and said, attracting Grid's attention, "Old man, Khan is really true." Holding a flyer announcing a competition for the right to own his kitchen and cancel the debt, one of the crowd nervously shouted out that these notices were posted all over the city. The leaflet said that the Miro Company and Blacksmith Khan would compete for the rights to the forge. And the reason we decided to do so was because we respect and admire Mr. Khan. And if Mr. Khan won, we would forgive his debts and help him keep the forge. Otherwise, the forge would be transferred to us, with Mr. Khan allowed to remain in charge of it. And our goal is to coexist with the people of Winston, and we hope you find this interesting. Looking at the leaflet that the residents were holding in their hands, the blacksmith said confidently, "Yes, that's true, but what's the real deal?" The resident nervously replied, "Well, it seems that marrow is better than we thought." The next moment, one of the residents happily said that by organizing this competition, they were paying tribute to Mr. Khan, and another added that it seemed like they were really trying to get along with us. After listening to the villagers who had arrived at the forge, Grid said thoughtfully, "Although they sent bandits to us, I think I have a feeling that something is wrong here. They may be a really good bunch." No sooner had Grid completed his thought than he heard an angry exclamation from Khan, who said, "The Marrow have taken over this territory and are dictating their terms to us. Have you really decided to forget everything just because they sent you a piece of paper about some kind of reconciliation?" Hearing these words from Khan, one of the residents said awkwardly, and then another added, "You see, it's a deception again, and it's not the first time, if you think about it." After listening to the conversations of those present in the forge, Grid mentally said, "Well, I was almost deceived once too." As soon as he thought about it, he suddenly heard someone's voice addressing him, saying, "I'm sorry." Looking at the guy standing in front of him, Grid said, "From what I heard, Marrow bought the land from the residents, so you didn't know about the Winston development, and they didn't force you to sell the land to them." Looking at the guy who was trying to shield Grid's company, the man said in surprise in his head. Noticing the mark above the head of the newcomer, Grid said in surprise in his head, "The green mark above his head is a player." The next moment, the same guy added, "After you sold the territory, you were going to leave this place, but you suddenly decided to stay because you learned about the plans to improve it, and this situation is caused by your personal interest and not by Marrow's fault." Hearing these words from the young man who had arrived at the forge, the angry crowd shouted, "What kind of nonsense is this? Did the company send you to us?" Trying to calm down the angry crowd, the guy stretched out his hand in front of him and said, "I'm not here to fight, but to make a profit for the trading companies, and once you realize this fact, you will understand." Immediately after that, with a sly smile, the guy added that you will be able to coexist with Marrow right away, because after all, the company cannot be named without residents. Hearing these words from the guy who was convincing the crowd that the company was right, one of the residents said thoughtfully, "I think he's right. If we coexist with them, we'll be even better off." When Grid heard that the angry crowd had quieted down and even taken a different stance, he said in his head that their minds had changed. Who was this guy? The next moment, Khan interrupted the conversation and said in a stern tone, "You are absolutely right to coexist with a big company, and it would be quite good indeed." Immediately after these words, the old blacksmith added confidently, "But the village of Winston is part of the territories of Count Stein, and there is a law here called the Law of the People." Hearing about the law that the old blacksmith had just mentioned, the boy was surprised to hear that it was the Law of the People. Hearing that he did not even know about this law, Khan said that people living in the territory of Count Stein should be the first to be informed about the planned changes, as Count Stein personally developed this project. Khan began his story by saying that the pioneers' discovery of new land in the north had a significant impact on nearby villages and towns. Recalling the ordinary people who lived in these estates, the blacksmith added that it was the will of Earl Stein to be ready for changes and to receive information in time so that people could be in an advantageous position. Hearing this, the boy said thoughtfully, looking at the blacksmith, "So it turns out that the company directly ignored the order of the count." Immediately after these words, the boy added confidently, "Then the Lord should be held responsible for allowing the company to monopolize information about development plans." Hearing that the visitor began to speak out against the company, Khan confidently added that this was the whole conflict. Turning his back on Khan, the man who had been trying to convince the people in the treasury of the rightness of the Baron's actions said, "Well, you have convinced me. I have to do something." The next moment, turning his attention to the ordinary citizens who were in the smithy, the boy said, "I heard that your appeals to the Count were blocked by the Lord and company," and he heard that it was true. Reaching out to the villagers to earn their trust, the boy said, "The evil deeds of Lord Marrow and company must be exposed, and I will inform the Earl of the situation in Winston." Glad to see a young man on their side who decided to help them, someone from the crowd of residents joyfully exclaimed, "Oh, here's our hope, thank you." Seeing how skillfully the boy was able to manipulate ordinary people, Grid said in amazement in his head, "It's just incredible how this guy managed to do it." Watching Kuroi, who had just skillfully pulled off something incredible, Grid added in his head that he hadn't received the assignment, but he had forced them to give it to him. As soon as Kuroi left the forge and headed for another task, Grid immediately followed him. Catching up with the boy, he exclaimed, "Hey, you!" Stopping in his tracks and looking back, Kuroi said in surprise that you were the statue in front of the forge. Angry that he was called a statue, Grid exclaimed in displeasure that after a few seconds he calmed his temper and said in a calm tone, "Let's be clear. I'm sure Marrow gave you a task, but why did you change sides?" Looking at Grid with an offended look, Kuroi said, "Oh, for God's sake, show me the information about the assignment." As soon as this phrase was spoken, a system window appeared in front of Grid, which read, "For the sake of the people of Winston, you betrayed the company for the sake of the city's residents. Avoid punishment from the company and report the situation in Winston to Count Stain. Condition an audience with Count Stain." After rereading the task description, Grid saw the most interesting description of the reward, which read, "Reward title, Apostle of Justice Maximum Reputation with the people of Winston gift from Count Stam. Apostle of Justice New Skill Courage, all characteristics, plus you will receive the skill Unwavering Justice." Seeing this, Grid was amazed to think what kind of unheard of rewards these were. Immediately after that, turning his gaze to Kuroi, Grid said unhappily, "I don't envy you at all. Tell me how you got them to give you a hidden task." To which he replied, "But you look as if you were jealous." Immediately after these words, Kuroi smiled slyly and said to Grid, "Did you notice that I made them give me a task? Well, I guess I could tell you to mark the occasion." Standing in a proud pose, Kuroi raised his finger up and said confidently, "This method uses the degree of freedom in Satisfy. I don't wait for the NPC to offer me a task. I try to say the words that will make the NPC give it to me. That's all I know, but it should be enough." The next moment, Kuroi added, "I think this information will soon appear on various sites. Only some of the first players know about it, so don't be disappointed." Noticing that Grid was acting strangely for some reason, he lowered his head to the frowning Kuroi and said, "Hey, what's wrong with you?" Raising his head, Grid did not hide his displeasure and said, "I'm also one of the first players." Hearing that he was also one of the pioneers of the game, Kuroi grabbed his stomach with laughter and said that you didn't know either. "But everyone uses this method, Boogaloo. You're funny. Let's be friends." Hearing the offer of friendship from the guy who had started mocking him, Grid shouted out in offense and walked out. Seeing that he had left the game after his offer of friendship, Kuroi said in surprise that he was upset and left. The next moment, deciding not to waste time, the boy headed for Count Stam, saying, "Well, I should hurry up. I don't want to waste time. My level is only about right, even though I've been playing for hours a day since the game was released." Continuing on his way to Count Kuroi, mentally said, "And all this is because my class is a speaker." Taking hold of his throat, the boy mentally said, "My most powerful attack is the evil paganism, and it is much harder for me to raise my level than others." Reflecting on his weak class, the boy mentally said, "Very few weapons available, low health, low combat power, and the most fatal weakness is the lack of a way to escape." Looking at the reward for completing the mission that he was forced to give him by the people of Kuroi, he mentally said, "I need to get courage to increase the characteristics of attack and defense, each characteristic plus points." Confidently walking to his goal, the boy said in his head, "I can't become a runner relying only on my tongue." Arriving at the gate that led to the castle of Count Kuroi, he saw the guards who defended it. Then he mentally said, I need to go through the castle gate to get to Count Stein. As he approached the guards guarding the gate to the exit from Baron Hero's grounds, he said awkwardly, "Good afternoon, I would like to leave." Continuing to play his role, Hero said in his head, "The guards are quite strict. I need to talk to them to get out," and then said, "I am just a traveler. If everything is okay, please let me pass." After standing there for a while waiting for a response from the guards, Kuroi said in surprise in his head. No reaction followed. It looks quite embarrassing. The next moment, Kuroi heard someone's voice coming from behind him and saying, "They will not answer your question. I have given them an order not to do so." He looked back and saw a very familiar face speaking to him, and nervously thought that it was Rebbit, but why was he here? The next moment, Rebbit added in a menacing tone, "According to all instructions, they were to tell us when you were coming, Mr. Kuroi." Hearing these words from Rebbit, the boy thought to himself, "He is starting to annoy me. I need to use the skill of persuasion. If I use it correctly, I will come out on top." Activating his passive persuasion skill, Kuroi confidently said, using gestures to make the point, "I came here to plan my strategy for persuading the residents. Isn't that the basis for creating a plan?" Hearing these words from the young man, Rebbit said disappointedly, "I'll be honest with you, I expected much better results from you." As soon as Kuroi stopped talking and started listening, Rebbit added, "You couldn't convince the residents even though we made them doubt by handing out these leaflets. Maybe it's a betrayal." Hearing that he suspected him of treason, Kuroi nervously said in his head, "Persuasion does not work on him." But why? Turning his gaze to the soldiers standing next to him, Rebbit ordered them to grab the boy and said, "I've studied your skills. They don't work for me. I'm sure you understand why you're under arrest." Realizing that things were going badly, the guy ran away and said, "Oh shit, I can't fail this task. I have to run away immediately." Before he could get far, he was attacked with chains that caught on his neck and made it difficult for Kura to breathe. Trying to untangle the chains around his neck, he pulled out his knife and mentally said, "Damn, this is not a good weapon, but I have no choice." As soon as one of the soldiers noticed the weapon in the boy's hands, he immediately rushed at him, and with the help of his spear knocked the knife out of Kuroi's hands. Realizing that his situation was quite critical, the guy mentally said, "I can't win with my strength. I need to run for the exit." Trying to leave the game while being detained, the guy received a system notification that said, "You cannot leave the game at the moment." Looking at the confused guy who had just tried to reauthorize, Rebbit confidently said, "It's useless to even try to resist. Don't you know we can neutralize your logout spell?" When the soldiers were already holding Kuroi hostage without the possibility of his escape, Rebbit told him, "You will rise again if we kill you. That's why we will put you in prison." Immediately after these words, the man menacingly told his subjects to immediately take him to the dungeon of the castle. The next moment, a system notification appeared over Kuroi, which read, "You have been captured by Rebbit. You will be imprisoned in the castle dungeon without any hope of escape. But if you are patient, the apostle of justice you failed to become will appear and rescue you. The condition is not to leave the game for hours in real time. This is an extremely dangerous task. We recommend that you refuse it." At the very end of the description of this task, there was a system window that asked if you wanted to accept this task immediately after reading it, and Kuroi nervously said in his head that hours was simply impossible. Recalling his past experience where he tried to play more than allowed, Kuroi mentally said, "I played for 20 hours in a row, but if you exceed this time, the system will force you to log out and you won't be able to log in for another hour as a penalty." Looking at Rebbit, who was watching him, Kuroi mentally said, "Being confined to days and hours of playing time is a very dangerous task indeed." Immediately after these thoughts, the boy gritted his teeth and said in his head in frustration, "But I am a lonely guy with no job and no one around to bother me." Thinking about how he can accomplish this task, Kuroi said in his head, "If I put the capsule into sleep mode, then I can hold out. I can't miss the chance to complete the S-class rank." After collecting his thoughts, Kuroi decided to spend the next few hours of real time in the game and spoke forward in his head. As soon as he accepted the task, a countdown timer appeared above him, as well as a description of the task that said, "You will receive the second class of Associate of the Apostle of Justice. No penalty for failure of this mission." Putting the capsule into sleep mode, Kuroi saw system notifications that said the capsule was put into sleep mode from now on. Your brain waves will be monitored to force you out of the game if there is danger. If your health is at risk, a doctor will be sent to you. Also, after that, another system warning appeared, which stated that in case of detection of external interaction, an employee of the SA Group employee to ensure the protection of the capsule. After reading all the warnings, Kuroi nervously said in his head, "I beg you, if you help me complete this task, I will be faithful to you until the very end of the game." Preparing to spend a long time in the same cell, the boy mentally said, "I'm waiting for you." And at that time, the clock on the company that created the game read, "The Satisfy game is a huge system where each player has the ability to change the world they are in by their own actions. 2 billion players who are already playing this game create 2 billion landmines, and that's why no bugs or mistakes can be made to maintain the world." While in his office, the game developer received an emergency message from the team leader, Lim Cholho, who said that the task, "Please allow an emergency meeting." Seeing the task code, the game developer informed the meeting that I would also be arriving soon. As he walked to the meeting room where the case was to be discussed, Lim Chulho thought to himself, to think that someone managed to activate an S-class task and was rewarded with a second-class task. While thinking about the consequences that could occur, the developer thought that if he completed the task, he would be able to use the skills of 2 classes. Continuing his thoughts, he added, "However, this requires spending hours of game time in a confined space, a task potentially dangerous for the player." Arriving at the meeting room, each of the attendees was presented with a sign with information that read, "Nick Kuroi, real name Dam Alunbatar, age years the player from Mongolia, was able to activate B." After reviewing the information about who exactly received such a test of fate, the game developer was surprised to hear that only all residents of Mongolia play this game. Hearing the surprise from Choi Nahi's supervisor, he was informed that his class was a speaker with low combat power, but he was able to reach the level by completing only tasks. Immediately after the girl's report, Lim Cholho himself told director Yoon Sung-min what the Mongolian branch thought about this. And after hearing the question from the chief developer, the director nervously spoke for a minute. After contacting the representative of the Mongolian branch, all those present saw the man who said this, Park In-hak, the manager of the Mongolian branch, and the heads of the branches present. With a sly smile, the chief developer said, "We are here to discuss the task of keeping the Alan-Bader player safe." Lim Cholho asked his question and was told that at the moment we are monitoring his vital signs and are ready to pull him out of the game at any time, and the Mongolian leadership has agreed to cooperate with us. Hearing that everything was going well, the Mongolian branch manager added, "I have a suggestion for you." Immediately after he piqued the interest of those present at the game's headquarters, Park In-hak added it was potentially the first player with multiple classes. Looking at the hologram image of the guy's character in the game, the manager from Mongolia added the first player with 2 classes from Mongolia will improve his skills quite well with this. Hearing these words, the director of SA Group happily said, "Given the small activity in Mongolia, we can increase sales with such news, a great opportunity," to which the secretary replied that so many people refuse to use the capsule. "I wonder if this is due to nomadic traditions." Hearing the joyful words from the company's director, one of the men present at the meeting said, "You're an optimist. If he fails this task, what will it do to our reputation?" Hearing these words from his friend, the director rubbed his eyes and said, "You don't have to worry about it so much." And Choi Nahi said in surprise. Looking at the screen, the director said, "The longer he stays in the game, the more likely the task is to succeed, and the task was created in such a way that it could be completed. Immediately after these words, the director of the company turned to his subject and said to the captain of the team, "You Nahi, you can tell the probability of success of the task." Hearing the question from her supervisor, the girl hesitantly replied, "I have uploaded all the documents, so you can review them anyway." Hearing the girl's warning, the director could not help but look in and immediately saw the chance of success and interrupted the girl, exclaiming in surprise that the probability of success was only 9%. After announcing the probability of success of this task, the director exploded from his city and said in surprise, "Wait," because the player was able to get this hidden task. Recalling how exactly this task should be completed, the chief developer said that the player would meet the mysterious apostle of justice in an underground prison when he heard about what had happened in Winston. The apostle would free him. Immediately after these words, going through all the system files, the man said, "First of all, you need to understand who will be the apostle and help the guy complete the task, receiving a large reward in return. You need to make sure that the players are as safe as possible." Looking through the files with the information, Lim Cholho suddenly smiled slyly, and one of the people present asked him what was wrong with the president, to which he replied, "Buga, just look at the documents." Turning his gaze to his subject, Lim Cholo added that it seems that an unexpected variable has appeared to share information about the task. Hearing this, the same man looked into the file and asked what was in the documents. Looking at the last actions of the guy in jail, the chief developer said thoughtfully, "Kuroi shared the task information with only one person, but he disclosed the task information halfway through, which is why the previous information was outdated." After reviewing the information, the man immediately grabbed his head and said nervously, "Oh shit," and the player he shared it with. Remembering the guy who was to become the apostle, the man added Shinyan to Grid. At the same time, Grid, who had arrived at the street food shop, was already drunk and began to exclaim in frustration, "What a shame! Just to think the task gave me only gold coins, damn old man." Continuing to irritate the shopkeeper, who could not get up and go home because it was already late, the boy exclaimed, "You should have given this task to me. Why him and not me, huh?" Recalling the same upstart who had taken away a great assignment with incredible rewards from him, Grid said in frustration, "I gave him the assignment only because he said something, despite the fact that I paid for your treatment." Immediately after these words, holding out a bowl to the owner, Grid said, "One more bowl of fish soup, please, and more vegetables, please," he added, pausing for a moment. Having finished his lamentations and complaints about his fate, Grid arrived home and said that it was already 1 o'clock in the morning and he should be quieter. As soon as he thought of this, his younger sister appeared in front of him and angrily exclaimed, "You should have told me you were coming home late. Do you even know what time it is?" Upon hearing this, Grid said in surprise, "Why are you still awake?" Not responding to being scolded, the boy went to his room and said, "You have to go to school early tomorrow." Hearing the question from her older brother, the girl said, "I was worried that someone was spending too much time in the capsule." Immediately afterwards, smelling the smell of alcohol, she asked in surprise, "Wait, what have you been drinking?" Ignoring the question about alcohol, Grid happily said to Shin Sei-hei, "Oh my, you're a sweet little sister. You were worried about your brother, weren't you?" Losing the desire to talk to the drunken man, the girl went to her room and said, "Stop joking. I was just watching TV. Now hurry up and go to bed." Hearing this, Grid said happily, "Is my little sister going through puberty, Boogaloo?" Recalling what a loser Grid is, one of those present in the meeting room said, "But shouldn't the probability of success be equal to?" Trying to understand what exactly happened and why the numbers did not add up, the man nervously said that the probability of success should be higher than it is possible that the supercomputer made some kind of mistake. Hearing these words from his employee Choi Nahi, he replied that this could not even be possible, to which he replied with a disappointed sigh, "I know, I just said it to cool down a bit." Seeing this reaction from his employee, The chief developer said that he was behaving like this only because the chances of success had decreased. Folding his arms in front of him, the chief developer replied that the one who should know about Huroy's situation is not the apostle of justice, but Grid. Looking at the screen that said, "Who knows what exactly happened to Huroy?" who was supposed to fulfill the mission to deliver the information, the man in the meeting room mentally said, "Damn, this Shinyonu is the worst of all options." Looking at Grid's profile, the man wondered in his head how he could only level up to a legendary class. What the hell he was doing all this time? Looking at the avatar of the guy who had taken on the burden of becoming an apostle of justice, the man continued to think very sadly that such lazy people were so lucky that another hidden quest would be lost because of him. After all his thoughts about the fact that such a guy received this task, the man thoughtfully said, "In this case, will he fail this quest, as you think?" Having received the question from his subject, the chief developer, smiling happily, said, "We had lost such a chance to advertise our game." Switching something on his touchscreen, the chief developer mentally said the only thing he did after receiving the legendary class was to create epic arrows and receive a class quest. The next moment, looking down and smiling slyly, Lim Cholho added in his head, "And that's why it's incredibly difficult to predict anything, but I think it's possible." Continuing to build huge hopes for the Black Horse, the game's lead developer continued in his head, because of its unpredictable behavior, these events will be quite interesting. At the moment, there are only 3 epic classes in Satisfy that players have already managed to get and use. In addition to the recently demonstrated Bloody Warrior, information about the other 2 is still unknown to the public. The first owner of the epic class has not yet been identified, but the other one is currently in 7th place in the top rankings among runners. And that's why the community can't stop arguing about what the other 2 epic classes are capable of. And at the same time, in the county of Stein, near the Akero dungeon, gathered in a huge crowd, many different players shouted out, "Our group is the strongest. Join us. We have much better half of the loot, and we will give all the loot to you. Please join us." Looking at the disgusting behavior of the men, one girl from the group said offensively, "And when I joined them, they didn't even want to lift a finger," to which another girl added in surprise why they were suddenly so excited. After receiving a question from her friend, one of the girls pointed at the young lady standing in front of the hungry crowd and said, "You see, she's a bitch. They've been hanging around her since she showed up." Hearing about the reason for the excitement of the crowd, the girl looked in the direction of the pointing and said thoughtfully, "Her name is Ephemera, because I'm right." And then she said to her fans, "I will join the strongest team. You can demonstrate your skills."